The Steel King Who Built America, Andrew Carnegie's Rise and Reckoning. In 1901, a man who had started his life in poverty sold his company for $480 million, an amount so vast that, adjusted for today, it hovers around $15 billion. That man was Andrew Carnegie, the Scottish immigrant who went from working 12-hour shifts in a Pittsburgh textile mill to becoming the richest man in the world. But the shocking part isn't just the money. It's that Carnegie, after amassing unimaginable wealth through ruthless business tactics, would later spend most of it trying to give it away, crafting libraries, universities, and cultural institutions that still exist today. He was both a robber baron and a saint, a man whose name inspires admiration and suspicion in equal measure. And his story, perhaps more than any other, captures the contradictions of capitalism itself. Andrew Carnegie was born in 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland, into a family of weavers. His father, William Carnegie, worked the handloom, but industrialization was devouring that trade. By the time Andrew was 10, the family's prospect had collapsed. Hunger and debt forced them to make the hardest choice. They sold their few possessions and boarded a ship to America, landing in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, in 1848. Andrew was 13, barely literate, and spoke with a heavy Scottish brogue. What he did have was energy, sharp instincts, and an unshakable belief that he was meant for more than poverty. His first job was brutal, working as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory for $1.20 a week. He changed spools of thread, often cutting his fingers bloody, the machinery clattering so loudly that conversation was impossible. Yet even there, Carnegie showed something unusual. He borrowed books, taught himself grammar, and absorbed stories of American heroes. His favorite was Benjamin Franklin, the poor boy who became a titan through cleverness and discipline. Carnegie would later model his life after Franklin, but with a modern twist. Franklin built civic institutions. Carnegie would build empires of steel. By 16, Carnegie had moved up to a telegraph messenger job. It was here that his life began to change. He memoized names, faces, and business addresses, becoming the fastest messenger in Pittsburgh. More importantly, he taught himself to read telegraph signals by ear, a skill so rare that it caught the attention of Thomas Scott, an executive at the Pennsylvania Railroad. Scott hired him as a telegraph operator. That moment, the leap from factory floor to railroad office, was a hinge on which Carnegie's fortune began to turn. The Pennsylvania Railroad wasn't just a company. It was a nervous system of America's growing economy. Carnegie, eager and ambitious, absorbed everything. He watched how railroads financed expansion, how government contracts worked, how inside connections shaped fortunes. Scott became his mentor, teaching him not just business mechanics, but also the art of power, loyalty upward, command downward, and profit always at the center. By 24, Carnegie was superintendent of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad, managing men twice his age. But Carnegie's genius wasn't just in management. It was in seeing opportunity where others saw risk. In the 1850s, Scott whispered to him about an insider deal, investing in a company producing sleeping cars for railroads. Carnegie scraped together $500, partly from loans, and bought in. The returns were spectacular. That first taste of passive income was intoxicating. Soon, he was investing in iron, oil, and bridges. By the time he was 30, Carnegie was making more from investment than from his salary. The lesson burned into his mind. Wealth wasn't earned with wages. It was built by owning the right assets. But there was a problem. The Civil War erupted in 1861, reshaping everything. Carnegie, by then a wealthy young man, was asked to manage military transportation for the Union. He organized rail lines, moved troops, and ensured supplies flowed. The war also revealed to him the enormous demand for iron and steel. Cannons, rails, ships, bridges, all needed stronger materials than America currently produced. Carnegie saw steel not just as a commodity, but as the backbone of the future. He decided he would master it. In the 1870s, he built the Edgar Thomson Steel Works outside Pittsburgh, naming it after a railroad executive who had helped him secure contracts. The key was the Bessemer process, a new method from England that allowed steel to be produced faster and cheaper than ever before. Carnegie invested heavily in the technology, slashing costs and undercutting rivals. His philosophy was brutal but effective. Cut costs, drive down prices, put the competition out of business. By the 1880s, Carnegie steel dominated the American market, producing more steel than all of Great Britain. But Carnegie was not a one-man genius. He was a master delegator, surrounding himself with brilliant, ruthless managers like Henry Clay Frick. Frick, who controlled vast coal operations, became both Carnegie's partner and his eventual nemesis. Together, they built an industrial machine that was as efficient as it was merciless. Wages were kept low, hours were long, and unions were crushed. The workers who toiled in Carnegie's mills earned pennies for 12-hour shifts, while Carnegie himself was making millions annually. The contradiction was glaring. The man who wrote essays about uplifting humanity was running an empire that ground laborious into exhaustion. The greatest stain on Carnegie's legacy came in 1892, the Homestead Strike. At the Homestead Steel Works near Pittsburgh, workers struck against wage cuts. Carnegie, conveniently abroad in Scotland, left Frick in charge. Frick hired 300 Pinkerton agents, private security men armed with rifles and pistols, to break the strike. Violence exploded. Workers and Pinkertons exchanged gunfire on the Monongahela River. By the time it was over, at least 10 men were dead and dozens wounded. The state militia was called in, the strike was broken, and Carnegie's image as a benevolent employer was shattered. Though he later claimed he would have acted differently, the truth was clear. Profit had triumphed over people. Yet the paradox of Andrew Carnegie deepened after Homestead. In 1901, when J.P. Morgan approached him to buy Carnegie steel, Carnegie shocked even himself with how easily he agreed. He scribbled a number on a slip of paper, $480 million. Morgan accepted. In that instant, Carnegie became the richest man in the world, richer even than the Rothschilds or Rockefellers at the time. But what he did next was astonishing. Instead of retreating into luxury, Carnegie turned to philanthropy with the same ferocity he had once applied to business. He wrote The Gospel of Wealth in 1889, an essay that laid out his philosophy. The rich had a moral duty to use their wealth for the public good, not to hoard it or pass it entirely to heirs. He denounced the idea of dying rich as disgraceful. True to his word, Carnegie spent the next 2 decades giving away over $350 million, nearly 90% of his fortune. He funded over 2,500 public libraries, built Carnegie Mellon University, established the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and poured money into museums, concert halls, and scientific research. His name spread across the globe, not as a steel magnate, but as a benefactor of civilization. Still, critics never forgot the irony. The libraries built with Carnegie's money were used by workers whose fathers had been crushed in his mills. His Peace Foundation was launched by the same man whose steel had armed countless wars. Was he redeeming himself, or merely laundering his reputation? That question has haunted his legacy ever since. Carnegie died in 1919, at the age of 83, in Lenox, Massachusetts. He left behind not just money but a blueprint for what a tycoon might do after the empire is built. Turn wealth into influence, and influence into immortality. His libraries, his institutions, his foundations, they endure more than a century later, long after the smokestacks of Carnegie steel have gone silent. So, what can we learn from Andrew Carnegie? He embodied both the promise and peril of capitalism. His rise shows the power of vision, risk-taking, and relentless focus. But his controversies, especially Homestead, remind us of the human cost hidden behind every fortune. Was he a villain who crushed workers, or a visionary who gave millions a gift of knowledge? Perhaps he was both, and that's the uncomfortable truth. Greatness often wears a double face. If anything, Carnegie's story forces us to confront a deeper question. Can immense wealth ever be earned without moral compromise? And when it is, does philanthropy truly balance the scales? Carnegie believed it could. Whether history agrees is another matter entirely. If you enjoyed this story, leave $1 in the comments.